G'day, I'm going to show you how to create solid walking bass lines. This is something I've thought a lot about because when you play the jazz bass, you do a lot of walking. I'm going to break it down into 3 important components. The first is a scale approach. Now you could practice this by picking a C7. Let's pick a C7 and play the scale associated with that chord. Let's go back down. Or let's pick an F7. Now, how does this apply to walking bass lines? Well, let me give you an example on the first 4 bars of a C blues. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can go up a scale, back down a scale. A lot of things work as long as it sounds good and makes a nice line. The second component I'd like to talk about for walking bass lines is the chromatic approach. What does the word chromatic mean? Well, basically, a chromatic scale is a collection of half steps. Let me give you an example on a C chromatic scale. It's all there, all the half steps. How does this work in a walking bass line? I'll give you an example, once again, on the first 4 bars of a C blues. 1, 2, 3, 4. The third component to a great walking bass line is the chordal approach. This is sometimes called the arpeggio of the chord. I'll give you a demonstration on a C7. Let's try an F7. Now you could start on the tonic, the root, the C. But what if we played an arpeggio starting on the 3rd, the E? Let's try an arpeggio starting on the 5th of the chord, the G. Once again, many possibilities. How does this translate, though, to a walking bass line? I'll give you an example, again on the first 4 bars of a C blues. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's my 3-step approach to walking bass lines. We have the scales of the chord, we have the chromatic notes, and then the arpeggio or the chordal element. So when we're on stage, we may not be thinking, okay, now I'm going to play a scale. Now I'll try some chromatic notes and then I'll play the arpeggio. No, what you want to do is put it into a blender and out comes good walking bass lines. Sometimes I'll use the chromatic notes when I have to get quickly to another chord. If I'm going from an F to a G chord, that works great. Sometimes I'll have 2 bars of a C7, so I can use the chordal approach. Or if I have 2 bars on an F7, I might want to walk up the scale. So maybe it's good to learn all the scales. not only your major scales, which there are 12, but also the 7th scales, like we practiced. The flattened 7th. Those scales are really good to learn because they come up in the blues all the time. Maybe practice a chromatic scale in a few different keys. All the half steps. And then practice the chords. Pick up a piece of music, have a look at the chords, then play the arpeggio of each chord. And back down. Once you have these skills down, then you can look at a piece of music, know exactly what to do, and then walk the bass. I'd like to demonstrate for you my approach to walking the bass on 3 choruses of a blues in C. I use the standard jazz chord changes, C7, F7, C7, F7, C7, and I'm going to stick in an A7 here because it leads nicely to the D minor 7, G7, and then what we call a 1-6-2-5 to get us back to the top. C7, A7, D minor 7, G7, C. 3 choruses, I'll demonstrate scales, chromatic notes, and also the arpeggio of the chord. Here we go. 2, 3. So let's talk about what I just played on the blues. For the first chorus, I kept it pretty simple, just stuck to basically the scale and the arpeggio of the chord, and playing in this part of the bass. And then back down the scale. People call this the meat and potatoes part of the bass. This is where we mostly walk our bass lines. But in the second chorus, I decided to venture up the fingerboard a bit. It's fun to play up in this area of the bass as well. And then back down. Once again, just using scales, chromatic notes, and of course the chordal arpeggio. Now in the third chorus, I felt sure that I was locked in with the keyboard and the drums, which is very important, and I felt quite free to even explore a little further and add a little more chromatic notes. Chromatic notes are great because they link one chord from the next. One other thing we can do to our bass lines is spice it up a bit. Sometimes I'll add an 8th note here and there, like this. It's nice because it mimics what the drummer plays on the cymbal. So when you're playing along with the track, really focus in on what the drummer's doing and what the keyboard is playing so that you can lock in with the drums and then you'll be swinging in no time. So have some fun doing it, creating your own walking bass lines.